Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So here is kind of an interesting story that dropped today. A big notable news item in the world of professional wrestling and also from the content creation and content rights fees kind of side of things. But there's also a little bit of a wrestling card angle that I'm going to talk about here a little bit. So this is kind of basically part and parcel why I wanted to have this YouTube channel to be able to talk about stuff like this a little bit more. But let's get into it here, and then we'll also talk about a couple of other things, and I can actually relate this a little bit to wrestling cards and some implications for that as well. So first off, we've got Netflix here. So this is from Reuters, and I'll include a link to this in the description. The headline reads, Netflix to stream WWE Raw in a $5 billion bet on live events. And this deal really comes down to the rights fees for Monday Night Raw, which is something that has been one of the shoes that was going to drop this year. The question really wasn't a matter of whether Monday Night Raw would land somewhere, but the question was, where were they going to land? How much was it going to go for? And then also what was going to be included in the deal. And this deal is actually kind of interesting in the way it's structured. Obviously, the Netflix one is the part that really comes off the page. That's the part a lot of people are going to focus on, and rightfully so, because it's different. It's Netflix really putting themselves into the realm of live events or live programming and kind of adding that to their portfolio and making it a much bigger thing. But it is interesting if you dig a little bit deeper and look at some of the stuff that they included in it, and we're going to learn more as this deal comes into play. But this deal that kicks in 2025 is going to change the landscape in a lot of ways for the way that professional wrestling is presented, and then also is going to be a very fascinating experiment. In addition to really being a deal that honestly makes a lot of sense for the WWE, but let's get into some of the pieces that kind of comprise this. First off, you got the $5 billion. That's the big number that comes off the page. It's a 10-year partnership. But here's the key piece that I think is interesting to it, is that it puts Raw on the streaming platform Netflix, but that's in the US, Canada, Britain, and Latin America, among other territories. So it's not just, a United States deal. It's one of those things where being in Canada, what that really means is that it pretty much puts Monday Night Raw under that roof. If I have a Netflix account, I can watch every episode of Monday Night Raw, and I don't need to have cable. And obviously a lot of things that have been moving slowly away from satellite and cable television into more of a cord cutting kind of world. And it just is an interesting play from WWE, but it does make a lot of sense. And obviously the money is huge because a 10-year partnership, you're talking about $500 million a year. But when you count the fact that they are also including these other territories, because there were rights partners and there are still rights partners in Canada, specifically for the WWE, which is Sportsnet here in Canada. And obviously, as part of that, they were getting some rights fees, dollars, that they were giving to the WWE in order to have those exclusive rights to the programming. And now Netflix obviously is taking that over. So it's one of those things where whatever those international rights fees were, and we don't really know what they are, obviously that kind of rolls into that $500 million figure. So I would expect that it is higher than what it was before, but I don't think it's as dramatically higher as it was when we were just comparing apples in the sense of the American rights fees to the oranges, that is these international rights fees and different components of it. In addition, Netflix will also exclusively telecast outside the US all WWE shows and specials, including SmackDown, as well as pay-per-view live events such as WrestleMania and the Royal Rumble. So that's a great value-add feature for some of those international markets. So that's kind of another element that plays into this as well, especially since Peacock and some of the other rights partners are going to start coming up. The question is going to be, is that going to get rolled into the Netflix package after, and then potentially balloon this up even more as they add more and more components of it? Plus, you've also got the tape library of, the digital tape library, so to speak, that's going to add another element to it where we had the WWE network, then that went away, and now you've got all these mishmash of different elements, and then you've got SmackDown available in different areas, and then this deal includes that SmackDown for some international markets, some pay-per-view live events. So there's a little bit of a mix and match on these international market side of it. And the fact that Netflix has gone in on this makes it really interesting from that perspective. And if you're in one of those markets, having that Netflix account, it's more of a value add for them, and it's really them going all in on being kind of a one-size-fits-all solution for all these different things. And that's not even counting what potential tiers, if there's going to be any commercials related to it, what if anything ad-wise they're going to do in order to offset some of the costs of this deal. That's why I say there's a lot of little interesting wrinkles if you're into the business side of things. I'm not going to dig into that too deeply, but it's just something to think about. Now, obviously, I'm going to mention the card element of it here in a second. So if you're kind of the card collecting side of it, you really don't care. Obviously, that's not going to be a big deal to you. Really what it comes down to is the WWE solidifies their flagship show on not a major network, but a major streaming service that is available to a lot of people, hundreds of millions of subscribers to Netflix internationally. It's one of those things where that makes it very available to a lot of places. So it's not like eyeballs can't find it. And that's kind of the future of the way a lot of these things are going to go. A lot of these companies, not including WWE, what really comes down to it for them is, can they get in front of the right eyeballs? That's kind of the question. And from there, it's also going to change the way we measure ratings, because really ratings aren't going to be a thing when you're doing it from a streaming perspective, because Netflix is the only one who really knows how many people watch, Raw on Netflix going forward. They're going to know. And if it's a crazy number, then I'm sure they'll let us know. But it'll be interesting to see if they do. how that compares to what Monday Night Raw was actually doing on television previously. Now, moving past that, one other element that I'll include as part of this deal is that they've got the option to extend this deal for another 10 years, potentially making it a 20-year deal, or they can opt out after the initial 5 years. So this is going to be kind of an experiment to see what, if anything, happens with it. Do they expand the deal to other international markets? Do they roll in some of these other library elements? All that is going to play into how this goes and how this partnership and relationship goes. But this is a very long-term relationship potentially. It could be as short as 5 years, or it could be as long as 20 years, depending on how things play out. Now, lastly, for comparison's sake, they include in here that the deal with Comcast ends this year, with Raw being paid about $265 million a year for the rights under the agreement. Which obviously, you take a look at the two numbers in a vacuum, and you say $265 to $500 million a year, and you go like, wow, huge increase. But like I said, it also includes those international elements. It's a good deal, obviously, but it might not be as a crazy wild deal as it might seem on the surface. Nonetheless, it gives, as I said, WWE a ton of stability going forward. They know where things are going to be for the foreseeable future, and that's a big deal as far as, brand equity, as far as the presentation of themselves and kind of situating themselves as being what they've already been, but it kind of really stamps them as being synonymous with the world of professional wrestling as a lot of people see it. Now, from there, I'm going to shift a little bit, and I'm going to talk a little bit about AEW, because they have their own rights fees that they're going to have to work out. And that's what's been kind of the interesting elephant in the room, because as WWE has been shopping around Monday Night Raw, it's become an interesting thing of where they were going to land. And obviously the rumor mill was all over the place. Amazon Prime, would it be... Netflix was maybe thrown out there. I did hear little wrinkles about it, but it wasn't really the main contender that a lot of people were thinking about. They were thinking about Amazon Prime. They were thinking about potentially going back to a different network, or even thinking about something like Warner Brothers Discovery, which is obviously the one that has AEW under their umbrella currently. And that was one of the elements that was kind of sitting there. Let's see, this will be really interesting to see how this piece plays out. But obviously this deal happening means that now the direction can look to see, all right, does that mean that Warner Brothers Discovery continues down the path of negotiating with AEW, which is something that's been discussed and kind of going back and forth. And really what it comes down to is the question again, how much, how long, and is it with them or is it with somebody else? Is it a mix and match of live television for some of the shows, streaming for others? Like, that's basically what the WWE model has become. There is a television element for SmackDown, but internationally, there's a streaming element with this, and there's the Raw element here that's going to be streaming. So now they're kind of on both platforms simultaneously and separately from each other at the same time. Now, the biggest reason why the AEW one is going to be particularly interesting is because, while, again, it's not going to change life in either one of the companies to have these things, obviously with WWE, it gets some additional stability, it gives them the additional money, it gives them the cachet, just taking it up another notch. But they've got all these other revenue streams going. It just solidifies them for the long run. For AEW, though, this next television deal could be transformative for them as well. Because if they're able to get the right number, it means all of a sudden they go into the black for the first time, really. And it allows them to also stabilize themselves. A good long-term deal, the right type of long-term deal with the right partner or partners, if they end up splitting up the package, so to speak, then that means it gives them the stability, which could, now I'm going to bring it over, it could translate into the card thing. Because we're going to talk a little bit about the state of where cards sit right now to kind of close this off a little bit. So as I go into it, I've got here the Cardboard Connection site, and I'll leave a link to it in the description. This is where things sit right now. We're looking at the 2023 cards. And with the 2024 we're now currently, the only one that we've got on the calendar is 2024 AEW Flagship from Upper Deck. And potentially, either for 23 or 24, based on the dealer conference that happened recently, the murmurs are there, and based on the presentations and good information there, is that it looks like we're going to get some kind of a Black Diamond product, which is actually a question I was going to ask originally when I was thinking about the state of wrestling cards currently. And that was going to be, is there going to be, for AEW, some kind of a high-end product to replace what they tried to do with Spectrum in 2021? And obviously, it seems like Black Diamond is the answer to that question. But thinking about the wrestling card landscape in general, just looking at it, we've got obviously Leaf Heroes of Wrestling, which is kind of its own niche product, and different products from Panini. But right now for the calendar, for the most part, it's been AEW dominant the last little while because we've had these releases, including 2023 Flagship. And obviously I already mentioned 2024 Flagship is down the pipeline. 2023 Metal Universe is actually quote-unquote a new product, which based on the estimated time of release means we should be getting a checklist in the next week or two. If we do, then that looks like a February release, if it comes to pass. Again, subject to change. But if we get that release coming in the next little while, the only thing on the WWE calendar currently that we can tell is 2023 Donruss Elite. And right now that's still up in the air. We've seen some images that it looks like some of that stuff's getting signed. We know that the lawsuit that was happening between Panini and WWE, where they were trying to transfer the rights over to Fanatics/Topps early, was a situation that was settled. The thing is, we don't know what the terms of the settlement were. Does that mean that Don Elite gets released? That's what it looks like is going to be the case, but we don't know when. We don't know what that's going to look like. We don't know if there's going to be any additional products coming down the pipeline. So while obviously in the TV rights side of things, WWE has solidified itself, in the wrestling card side of things, we're still a little bit murky. We're still a little bit up in the air. Now, realistically, that means that AEW, from the card perspective, is in a solid place because they're actually releasing a series of products with a semi-regular cadence. But one of the kind of the key pieces to this is that television rights package, I think, is going to have a little bit of a trickle-down effect because I think people just don't feel comfortable investing too much of themselves. Again, the product right now is struggling a bit, but I'll talk about that more in a future video for sure because I think they're making some inroads to potentially turn that around. But an absolutely key thing for them is going to be to give the perception that they're a long-term player, that they're stable. That's why I mentioned at the very beginning of this whole thing that a television rights deal, a transformative television rights deal, or at least a stabilizing television rights deal, WWE, it's just another notch in their belt to be able to take their flagship show and be able to put it in this position. And for them, it's a great headline and everything. But really what it does is it just solidifies them for the long term. It means they know they've got a steady revenue stream coming year after year. And that's huge. Between SmackDown having a steady revenue stream, this one having a steady revenue stream, and just knowing that those things are in place with potentially more rights fees coming up in the future that they can monetize, it just means that WWE now through TKO is a cash making machine. They just basically just roll out of bed and make more money. For the average person, you don't care. I get that. But for the company and for the perception of the company, it means that when they roll out a product, people have a pretty good faith that, hey, this company's still going to be here in a year, 5 years, 10 years. Whereas AEW was kind of in that position where Tony Khan has a lot of money. He could bankroll this thing pretty much indefinitely. But without a television partner, you're not a real player. And, since like I said, the channel talks about wrestling, talking about TNA. TNA has done a series of really great shows. They're doing some signings. They're doing some interesting things. But they're still kind of in this murky middle ground when it comes to television. They're just not available in as many places. People can't see it as easily. They got to go out of their way. And when people have to go out of their way, you just don't get the same amount of traction, even though they're doing a lot of really good things. I do think there are some elements where perhaps AEW could do some good things that will help build their audience. Right now, the product's a little bit stagnant, but I am seeing small signs of life. Again, encouraging. We'll see what happens down the road. But if they're able to announce a similar kind of deal, even if it's not like in the same dollar stratosphere, I don't expect it to be. It's likely going to be a fraction of a lot of these deals that WWE has signed. That doesn't mean that a good, solid deal that guarantees their future for the foreseeable future, a good, decent length deal, could solidify them as a brand and say, they're still going to be on. They're still going to be available. You're still going to be able to watch them and expect to see them going forward for the next however many years it's going to be. I think that'll have a little bit of a trickle-down effect to the cards. Now, the cards themselves are also going to have to hold up their end of the bargain. And I've got my own critiques and criticisms with some of the stuff that Upper Deck has done. But they've also produced some good products. I think 2022 AEW Allure is an excellent product. The most recent flagship, I think, is a very good product. At 2024, we'll reserve judgment because we haven't seen it yet. But they've still got certain issues with supply, certain issues with price points, certain issues with where the product sits currently. I did mention it was stagnant. Well, unfortunately, that carries over to the cards too. There's been a revitalization of interest, obviously, since CM Punk left AEW in kind of a contentious way and then got it back into WWE. And right now, it looks like he's priming for potentially an interesting slot for the WrestleMania season and potentially WrestleMania. The question will be, and this is something we can monitor in the weeks and months to come, is does that mean his cards take a little bit of an uptick? Because I can tell you some of the AEW cards, they do okay, but they're a little stagnant. Some of them don't move as much as you think. A card to maybe keep an eye out on that would be interesting would be the AEW CM Punk PMGs. Because people talk about how much they like PMGs and how popular PMGs were, especially during the card boom. But CM Punk has a PMG with AEW through Upper Deck, and honestly, some of them just didn't sell that much. I know I pulled one in a box, and I was able to sell it. I made my money on it because I was able to get the boxes cheap enough. But the reality of it is that it wasn't the crazy hot seller that you would kind of think, especially with the notoriety of CM Punk, and obviously with what's going on with him right now, where he's being featured prominently. And you would think that would be enough, but I think that brand loyalty is a thing. So if the AEW product is not hot, then it's not going to change the fact that even though it's the same character, looking the same, sounding the same, under the same nickname, it just doesn't carry the same weight. Whereas if a good WWE product came out right now with CM Punk in it, I'd suspect there'd be some interest. And that's just something that's kind of interesting, a unique wrinkle in this space. So anyway, a lot of different thoughts I want to throw out there. And obviously on the back of this Netflix news with WWE Raw, it is going to be interesting how that goes going forward. But it also, I think, is going to trickle down a little bit into the cards because, well, we kind of knew WWE was stable in the first place. They've not made a lot of big deals, and this is just another one in a run of very large deals for WWE. And now the next shoe to drop is going to be to see what AEW does with their own television rights deals, which they're going to need to settle sooner rather than later. And does that trickle down over to the card side of things? So with all that said, more videos coming up on the channel down the road here as I talk about some of these other elements. I do want to talk about things like EPAC coming up, which is going to have some impact, I think, on the AEW cards, and some other wrestling and wrestling card related topics. So for now, that's it. Like if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you in the next one.